How was the VMUG in Warsaw?
Good, yeah, I liked it. It's a good event again.
Yeah?
So the setup was nice as well. So I think it worked out nice in the Google office, and the audience was very engaging. So it was a good event. I've been telling other VMUG leaders as well. I like the way that you are running things in Poland, because it's as we call it in Dutch, easy accessible, or easy to go to. It's not a huge event, so anyone can walk in. You don't need any additional sponsors. You have one sponsor, and you can just do whatever you want to do, right? And the sponsor takes care of everything else, so it's just much easier.
I think it's a crucial, because you need to, in my opinion, the VMUG is a place for community, and if you build bigger and bigger events, which is kind of from one side easy and from second side hard for many reasons, you're ending up in the situation when the community stops to be that important, right? Because in community, the best is when there's a real meetup, right? When the people come in and they can stand up and talk, right? About their problems, about ask questions, have a chat. That's the point. When it's a huge event, like 300 people, they're super hard for them to raise a hand and just say, hey, I have that kind of problem, because they feel, a little bit overwhelmed, I think. Thanks for that, and thank you for coming. Well, today you are at the evoilutioncast. We have, I believe, 48 episodes right now. My name is 𝓛𝓲𝓷𝓽𝓮𝓷𝓽. Duncan, tell a little bit about yourself to people who listen us or watching us on YouTube.
Who I am and what I do, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I've been in IT.
I think so.
I've been in IT for the longest time. I can't even recall when I started. It was probably somewhere halfway in the 90s. I started out as a consultant, focusing mainly on Windows machines. And back in the day, of course, there was no virtualization, so it was all physical. I dabbled a bit in the.
They call it Wintel.
Yeah, exactly, right? In the Wintel space.
Wintel.
Yeah, I was a Wintel admin. I did some Linux as well, by the way, in the early days. But my focus had always been more the Windows machines, and over time, I moved job roles quite a few times. I was responsible for email systems, databases, Citrix environments. So basically, done everything that most of the listeners or watchers probably also have done. And then at some point in time, I worked for a company, and we had all of the classic data center challenges. So insufficient cooling, insufficient power, lack of rack space. We started hitting all of those problems as there was a big boom in terms of IT systems that were required, but also the requirements from those systems at the same time went up. So we started looking into different options that were out there, and one of those options, of course, was virtualization. And this was like back in the 2.x days, so fairly early on. And I was the person that did that investigation for the company together with someone else. We found out that there was this thing called VMware, and we figured, let's give it a try. So we downloaded some of the bits and the pieces. We started playing around with it, and we immediately were very excited. And as a result, we ended up virtualizing.
You're telling my story.
Yeah, it's everyone had the same story, and as a result,
from 60 servers you get to 4, right?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
7, right? It's
exactly.
Crazy stuff.
And we ended up virtualizing the whole estate as a result. And I got so excited about it because I worked for an insurance company at that point in time. But I was so excited, I just wanted to make this my day-to-day job. So I ended up leaving that company, and I joined a consultancy company where they actually had a virtualization practice. It was more broader than just VMware. We were also doing some other things, but most of those other things actually disappeared within 6 months because they weren't as stable as VMware. But I ended up focusing primarily on VMware, and around that time, because I was very interested in technology and learning new stuff, I was documenting everything I did. And most of those writings then ended up on my blog, which probably this was at right before the whole VMware thing got extremely popular. But as a result, my blog also completely blew up. So I went from like 5 visits to 100 visits within a month. and then all of a sudden I had 100 visits within a day, and then all of a sudden I had like 1,000 per day. It blew up to insane proportions. I was talking to Comic about it. I
Yeah.
think at the height I was getting about 200,000 views or more per month, right? So
Well,
it's, yeah, it was insane.
Yellow Bricks, right?
Yellow Bricks, yeah.
It's the place called Yellow Bricks. Yeah, I remember your blog from very early time when I started. I had the same approach back in the days when I was starting with 3.5, right? And doing the same story like you had. Documented everything, because there was literally nothing on the internet.
Yeah.
Right now, you can go on many blogs, right, or ChatGPT or wherever, Claude, and it will
Yep.
tell you some stuff, right? You will find some stuff. But back in the days, like 15, 17 years ago, the sources was basically only like maybe 20, 25 blogs overall
Yep.
in the internet to go through it, the same problems. So you get to the VMware. And in VMware, you go from one business unit to another R&D and stuff like that. And you end up where right now? Where you are? What you doing right now? Which is your focus?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't realize. When I started out at VMware, I actually was hired as a consultant. So I didn't start in the position that I have today. And as you say, I actually moved from one organization to the other organization. And ultimately, for the last couple of years, I've been working for what now is the VCF business unit, which before the merger, I was actually part of the storage and availability team. And my role is kind of strange because there are not too many people in the company that have a similar role. Or Cormac Hogan has a similar role, and William Lamb has a similar role. But our focus is primarily on evangelizing what it is that we have available today, but at the same time also gather information and requirements from customers and problems that they are facing and feed those back to the engineering team and to the product management team as well. So just an example, I was, as you mentioned, I was in Poland not too long ago for the VMUG. And during the VMUG, you have conversations with people. I do a presentation typically for 45 minutes. And then after the presentation, there's always someone that has a question or has feedback about what it is that we do. And I take that feedback and then provide it back to the engineering team. And it could be very simple, like, there's an option in the UI and
Doesn't
I
work,
cannot
right?
find it,
Properly.
or it doesn't
Yeah.
work, or but it could also be like I've got this big use case and I want to have S3 object storage available as part of the storage platform, but vSAN doesn't do it. So what are you planning in that space? And so I take that back to the product management team, and they add it to the list of all the requirements and requests we get from customers, and they prioritize it accordingly, and then hopefully over time they will introduce an enhancement to the platform or maybe a new feature to the platform.
That's super cool because it's exactly what the VMAX are done for. So it's feedback towards the community and feedbacks towards the vendor because everybody uses that software and they want to have this stuff sorted, or somebody listen to them and tell them, hey guys, now you just need to change approach because on the roadmap it's like 67 years in the future. So not today, not in very feasible future. Just change your way to work, or just tell them, like, hey, it's an interesting idea, right? And let's implement it, or at least put it in the plan. So when we talk about VCF, it's a big thing over the last couple. I think we could say soon years, because like the VCF9. I mean, the proper VCF, right? Like everybody called it right now, because it was VCF5 and everybody was like, yeah, it's a platform. But right now with VCF9, it's a real deal, private cloud, a real private cloud platform. When you see this vSAN development in that, the storage development, what is your biggest, let's say, where you see as the biggest use case? Because it have different flavors and you potentially use it in different customers in different use cases. What you will tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at vSAN itself, at this point in time, and I've had many conversations with
This
customers.
platform.
Yeah, and if I look at if you look at the platform, and last week I was at Explore on tour in Frankfurt, and if I talk to customers and I look at the use cases that they have, it is all over the place. So back in the days, of course, when we started out with vSAN as a storage platform, The primary target was just traditional workloads, and a lot of cases, of course, they were test dev environments because people were getting comfortable with the system itself, which makes sense, right? That's how you started out with virtualization as well. The first thing you virtualized was the test dev environment, and then you slowly start adding other systems on top of that platform. And of course, over the past 12 years, we've seen the same thing with vSAN in 2013 with the very first release. It was just being used for test dev. But these days, it's all over the place. So we see customers deploying all sorts of workloads on top of vSAN. And we're talking, about business critical, but also mission critical workloads. We're talking about workloads that actually are being used by, an army or a marine, or even in, places as submarines, etc. And so it's all over the place. But on the other hand, we also have financial institution running all of their mission critical or business critical workloads on top of the platform, where latency is extremely important, because every millisecond delay could cost them a fortune. You can imagine that when it's a stock exchange, an outage of 5 seconds could be extremely disruptive. So from a use case perspective, I would say at this point in time, there are barely any use cases that we cannot cater for. Of course, there are some things where vSAN is different than a traditional storage system, but in most cases, people are capable of, working around that or adopting a new way of using the storage systems. And I'm not just talking about, before I forget, I'm not just talking about virtual machine workloads, because of course a lot of people are also running cloud native workloads on top of vSAN, and we also have the capabilities as part of the platform to connect volumes, in any shape or form to those cloud native workloads. So that also works, for instance.
So from the edge to very sophisticated data centers,
Yep.
from single site to multi-site setups. Right now, this is something that's working more than 10 years, in production at many customers. What you see as a new workloads that coming and or soon gonna be considered on this we can call it a storage platform. It's not vSAN anymore. It's a storage platform,
Yep.
part of the VCF. What you see there? What is coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who attended Explore or is attending a VMUG in the future or has attended a VMUG in the past 12 to 18 months, I think.
Let me take my glass. Okay, go for it. I will make a drink for that.
Yeah, of course. I hope
Every
it's
time
not
when I
vodka
hear
because it's
AI,
early in the morning.
If I hear AI, I always saying that this is the best choice. It's the best game. If you hear AI on the conference, you just take a sip.
Yep.
After the conference, you're dead.
Exactly, and it is one of those things, of course, that we as a company have spoke about fairly frequently. But the interesting thing is that, like I said, I was at Explore in Frankfurt last week, and it is also being brought up by a lot of customers because, as you can imagine, a lot of customers are now facing challenges where every single line of business owner is deploying their own AI ML projects in public clouds, but also internally on private clouds. And of course, as you can imagine, as a business owner, it's extremely important to not only ensure that the experience end to end is the same for everyone, but they can also control the cost. But on top of that, also when they deploy systems like that, it's also done in a secure manner. And when I talk about security, I'm not just talking about firewall rules, but I'm also talking about the security of the data. So that is one of those use cases which is starting to pop up all over the place because people want to prevent lines of businesses storing sensitive data in random places where they have no control over it and they have no idea who's actually accessing the data, who can see what is being stored in those systems, and maybe also, have some form of benefit from the data as well. So the whole sovereign cloud discussion, I think, applies to AI and ML even more than it does to any of the other workloads. So I agree with you. It's a buzzword, but it is coming up with customers fairly frequently, and I'm not even the expert.
Yeah, me too. I'm just seeing that use cases are popping in the sense that, hey, we have tons of data and there are production data. And we know that there is a lot of knowledge inside, but as well, it's a lot of sensitive information. We want to make, let's say, a copy of it, but obscure the way that we can put some kind of mechanism on top of that, ML or AI, whatever you can call it, or human in the end, and they have access to that data to looking for patterns. Do you see that with the recently added to the VCF stack as included, let's say the platform for AI platform and the storage platform, do you see their attraction? So this is gonna be the next, let's say, big step for vSAN, right? Under it or something else?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's if you look at vSAN itself as a storage platform, of course, it's fully integrated with VCF and with vSphere in general. So any workload can benefit from it. And the nice thing I think about it is not, I mean, vSAN by itself, it's just a storage platform, but there are many different services
Exactly.
that run on top of it as well. And I think when you, for instance, can also leverage some of the DR capabilities, which you can add on top, or the cyber resiliency capabilities that you can add on top, I think those things are way more beneficial and important to customers than just running vSAN itself. It's all of the capabilities that you add on top. So, and I think that makes it probably one of the best platforms that you can run in the private cloud today.
So when we talk about these capabilities, you touched a little bit the subject of object storage, because this is something interesting what is appearing on vSAN, especially right now, continuing our AI discussion, let's say. The AI loves object and go through it, right? So now the storage platform VCF, generally vSAN, have capability of object. And where are you seeing it? Like, what is the use case for that? Where you see the customers plan to implement that or working
Yeah,
with it?
it is probably good to briefly explain first what it is that we've announced, because I just want to make sure that people understand that this was just an announcement, yet it's not available at the moment. So what we've announced is that in the future we will provide an S3 compliant object storage service on top of vSAN. This object storage service, I think, was first announced as vSAN native object storage, but after I've had a conversation with the various teams, I'm guessing going forward it will be called VCF, native S3 object storage, because it is very much a service that needs to run on top of VCF itself. Because, for instance, in order to enable it, it will require VCF automation. Because it will provide that multi-tenancy layer that customers will expect. Now, if you look at that platform itself and you look at some of the use cases, I think, of course, for us, there are various use cases that could be very interesting, but that could be as simple as backup and recovery, whether that is for the VCF components itself or maybe for, let's say, a Kubernetes cluster. Of course, the other fairly obvious use case, of course, is the whole development space. As you've already mentioned, both AI, ML, as well as cloud native workloads do tend to like to talk to a very specific type of storage. That could, of course, be file storage, but S3 object storage is something that is very popular amongst the various use cases. So developers tend to prefer that platform. And mainly because, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in the public cloud, from a compliancy perspective, the majority of systems typically tend to adhere to the same standards, although they may not all, from an API perspective, be 100% compatible, or they're not at the 100% level just yet. It is a very popular framework, and typically most of the API calls that customers will either use, in the public cloud or on-prem as well, are
I
shouldn't
think
be
it's super important what
go
you
ahead.
what you said about the multi-tenancy and the automation layer, because when I looked at the presentation you made and there was a GUI of the object storage extension, it seems to be super similar to what was called back in the days in vCloud Director world, vOSE, right? So there was a connector that allow you to use some external disk array as a object storage presented to the vCloud vCloud users, basically tenants. And I think that is a continuity, because I don't know if I'm right. That's the question for you. It's a continuity of that product, or you develop it out of the, or like completely new.
No, this is a completely new product. So
Okay.
it's a
Nice.
completely different engineering team. So this is a whole separate effort that has been instantiated a while ago. And if you look at the platform as well, and just to explain to those who are not familiar with it, with VCFA, of course, that is, as you mentioned, that is the multi-tenancy layer. And when I explained it during the presentation, I could also notice there were some people looking at me like, yeah, but I have a provider administrator or an infrastructure administrator, but I don't have tenants, and I don't have I have a user that needs to access it, but there's nothing in between the user and myself. Now, with VCFA, although we provide the option to have multiple persona, that is an infrastructure administrator, that could be a line of business owner who manages the whole project and all of the resources that are part of the project. And then at the end, you have a developer that accesses a particular service. You don't necessarily need to have all of those. And I think that is probably something to be aware of as well, because last week when I was having these conversations with customers, they're like, oh, it feels like overly complex. And now within the UI, you have all of these options and all of these different personas. But of course, you don't necessarily need to have those. On top of that, all of what will be available within the UI is also available through the API. So if you use VCFA, but you primarily use the APIs, of course, you can fully do so and fully instantiate S3 object storage on top of the VCF platform using that API. You can create a bucket within that object storage service, and then you can expose it to a user that wants to use it. So I think that's probably also something which is probably very relevant to share for those who are not familiar with those concepts just yet, because there is a lot happening in this space, and even for me, it's sometimes difficult to grasp, especially at the rate that we're developing right now. What may be part of it today may not be part of it tomorrow. I know at the event you asked me, oh, is the warm option going to be part of the platform? So I asked the developers 2 weeks ago, and they said, yeah, we're still considering that. Last week, the project manager told me, well, it's very likely that we'll have object locking as part of the platform. So it is actively being developed, and as a result, there will also be changes occurring, right?
And I think it's the point, right? You have the feedback, you have real action, right? But coming back to this capabilities of the platform, so we have this object as a new thing coming in. You can think about vSAN not anymore as a block storage, basically, but you can add that on top of that object. But the object usually it's considered as something that it's huge, right? So it's not usually let's put some terabytes, like a couple terabytes, and put stuff. No,
Sure.
object it's marvelously big. It's petabytes of data. And what I saw as well in the new platform that coming is this storage nodes only. This could be very interesting to explain to our listeners that we can have right now the storage nodes that they don't run any VM, but they basically create a unified space for potentially, and this is my question, for object as well, that we can make a 1 petabyte setup of servers with disks, right? Put it vSAN on top of that, and then present it as an object to the consumers.
Before I actually address that, it's probably also good to explain from a sizing perspective what we've seen with customers, because when people tend to talk about vSAN, people tend to talk about terabytes, but we have multiple customers actually running multiple petabytes worth of storage capacity on top of vSAN. And if you actually do the numbers and you look at the sizes of flash devices that are available today, so let's assume you have 10 flash devices per host at the moment. And a flash device is 15 terabytes large, and you have 60 or 64 of those hosts within a cluster, you're already talking about 9,000 terabytes in total, so 9 petabytes, right? That is within a single cluster. We're just using 10 devices per host. Now, there are also, of course, storage,
and
or there
you have
are also
24.
servers. yeah, you can easily do 24. So it could be even double that easily, or 2.5 times the amount that I've just mentioned. So we're talking about 10 plus petabytes within a single cluster. That is just the HCI form factor. Now, as you can imagine, as you've mentioned, we have multiple form factors as well in terms of the architecture that we have for vSAN. You can either do it in a HCI mode, where you run both the workloads as well as the storage within the same cluster. But the other thing you can do with vSAN these days is you can create what we call a storage only cluster and expose that storage as a data store out to vSphere only cluster. So you could have multiple vSphere clusters actually connecting back to a cluster which is just there to provide storage to the rest of the world. And as you can imagine, if you look at those configurations that we support, those are even bigger. And the funny thing is that today you can already go up to multiple petabytes just using TLC flash devices, TLC NVMe devices. But as I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago, when I was in Poland visiting the VMUG, we're also planning on supporting QLC in the future, which not only means that the capacity will go up, but also the price of that capacity as a result will even go down further. And then on top of that platform, we are now also offering, for instance, the capability to enable deduplication, global deduplication across the cluster. So if you have tens of petabytes within that single cluster, that could, if deduplication has been enabled, be 3 or 4x the amount of capacity that you have from a physical standpoint. So yeah, it can grow extremely large. And I was at the Explore on Tour conference last week, and there were some customers asking about, how big can it actually grow, because we feel there are some limitations. And then when you provide them these examples and you explain to them with deduplication, etc., and compression, we're talking about multiple petabytes worth of storage capacity, as big as 10, 20 petabytes per storage cluster, which is a ridiculous amount of storage. And especially when you talk about S3, of course, we will require that, or we will need that, because some customers actually have extremely large object storage solutions. So, yeah, of course, there's a reason we are doing that, but from a capacity standpoint, you can go wild, to be honest. And we actually see customers doing that. And in some cases, they build environments which are like 5 times larger than they can ever consume, simply because they can, which is, of course, crazy, but it happens.
The question here is as well, when we talk about these capabilities of vSAN, of the platform right now, on top of the, in general, capacity, right, performance, and all of this built-in features that we used over years, right, that it's scalable, that you can use normal servers to do it, standard stuff. We have as well this security layer, that it's something that not everybody feel very comfortable with, because it's something fairly new, right? So like right now, you not only store data on storage platform, but you as well can see what the data means, or who have access to it. Could you tell a little bit about that? Because this create another use cases for what you really can keep in your private cloud, which is already yours, right?
Yeah.
And how you can govern that.
Yeah, that is a fairly difficult.
What vSAN propose here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at vSAN itself, of course, vSAN is a completely different type of storage system than some of the other storage systems out there. If you look at vSAN from a basic functionality perspective, it's just a pure block storage system. So it provides block storage services to virtual machines, meaning that you can create VMDKs and log files, etc., whatever it is you want to store for a virtual machine perspective. And of course, from that point of view, who can access the system is purely limited by who has access to the vSphere hypervisor, and how the vSphere hypervisor has been configured from a security standpoint. So there are some limitations from that perspective as well. But now, if you look at what sits on top of that, so for instance, with vSAN, you can also enable file services. You can also enable the iSCSI block option, where you can create LUNs for whatever purpose as well. So you can connect those LUNs which run on top of vSAN, and you connect those to virtual machines, or you can create file shares and actually expose those file shares back to some of the customers as well. Now, in full transparency, because this is something that actually came up last week as well, I had some customers asking for this. For instance, for vSAN file services at the moment, auditing is something that is not part of the platform yet. And we're actually planning on, as a result, re-architecting vSAN file services to the same layer that we're now creating for object storage, simply because the layer that we are building for object storage has all of the multi-tenancy capabilities built in as part of the platform. As you mentioned, it's part of VCF, and the capabilities that it provides will allow you to have separate networks, to have separate tenants, to have separate users, set up security for all of those different components, set up, for instance, quotas for all of those different services that you're exposing as well. So what we're actually planning for is to move over those file servers into the same architectural framework, so that we can inherit all of the capabilities that are part of the VCF platform. So it will make that platform, from a vSAN file services perspective, inherently more secure as well, and will provide all of those capabilities like auditing, etc., as a result, in a fully automated fashion. So some of those things are still being worked on, and of course, as I mentioned, from an S3 object storage point of view, that is still under development as we are speaking. So it is difficult for me to say what will be included and what will not be included. Now, what of course, because I think the sovereignty aspect is an important discussion, and of course the big benefit of this platform itself is that it typically runs on premises, so you have control over who even gets access to the data in the first place, right? So that is a big difference, of course, between what it is that VMware is offering and what it is that other solutions that are running in a public cloud are offering. And in this particular case, of course, the data is also contained within your own data center and is not, swarming around Europe or wherever it may end up.
Yeah. But when all those people and all those personas will put the data on different protocols, one on the iSCSI loans, one on the block storage, one on VMDK files, some on the object, some many places, now it's a multi-protocol access place, right? How we govern that data? Do we have any mechanism built in the platform for that?
Yeah, I think probably one thing to mention here as well is, when we look at all of these different ways that vSAN is exposed, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is capable of connecting to the same data set using different mechanisms. So, for instance, if you create an iSCSI LUN, you cannot connect to the same iSCSI LUN over NFS or via S3 object storage. So those are separate constructs which are only exposed to those who need access. So with iSCSI LUN, as you can imagine, there are iSCSI initiators, etc. So you have to specifically set that up and provide access to a virtual machine to that particular LUN. For NFS and for SMB, of course, the same thing applies. Already today, right, with NFS, you can specify which IP addresses need to get access to which share specifically. Anyone else cannot access the data. For SMB, of course, we have authentication services that will provide access to a particular share. So if you do not have access, of course, you cannot access the data on top of that. And then, as you can imagine, with S3 object storage, as it is going to be orchestrated through the VCF platform, of course, all of the multi-tenancy aspects that apply to VCF will automatically apply to S3 object storage as well. So in that particular scenario, that is probably also a good one to address here. A virtualization administrator will be able to, for instance, create an S3 object storage service. Now, the tenant will then be able, within that object storage service, as it has been assigned, so only after it has been assigned to them, be able to create a bucket. And they will specify who can actually access the bucket itself. So which developer can access the bucket. That also inherently means that I, as an administrator, who may be responsible for the
have
whole
access.
infrastructure, I don't get access, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because you don't want to have your infrastructure administrators, fiddling around with data that they shouldn't be able to access, depending, of course, on the sensitivity of those systems. So although they may see an object storage service and they may see a bucket, they should never be able to access the data. You can imagine that it could be very important when it's research data, but also, when the sensitive HR data with, salary details, whatever it is that's being stored within the same systems, you should not be able to access that. So, of course, we're taking all of those things into consideration as well as part of the platform.
Right. Let's say that we have this multiple protocolar access to different storage, let's say, constructs. Right, we can have this construct spread in to keep it in, let's say, hyperconvergent infrastructure with VMs. We can deattach that and build the storage only cluster, right? And then you mentioned something about disaster recovery and replication, basically, on top of that. So we can take this, for example, my shot, the storage cluster, and put it in the third or fourth or wherever X data center, and just make the replication there of our data and VMs and containers.
Yeah, I think that is the nice thing about the platform that we actually provide, not just for vSAN, by the way. That also applies to any storage system that is connected to VCF. So there could be fiber channel, it could be NFS, or it could be anything else that you connect through to vSphere. Of course, as you know, most people listening will know, we've had vSphere replication available for the longest time. Of course, we had Site Recovery Manager available for the longest time as well. That could take advantage of vSphere replication, which would allow you to replicate across any storage system. But on top of that, as part of the platform, we also allow you to replicate between pure storage and pure storage through a native mechanism. But you could also do Dell EMC to Dell EMC or Dell EMC to NetApp, depending on what you prefer. But we also recently added on top of that is the capability for vSAN specifically to create fairly deep snapshot chains and replicate those snapshot chains either between vSAN ESA and vSAN ESA. But of course, with vSphere replication, you can replicate it anywhere. And on top of that, what we're also planning for in the future is to do any to vSAN ESA as well. So replicate pure storage to vSAN ESA, and then on the vSAN ESA side, for instance, you go all the way down to 200 snapshots deep. Now, just briefly mention that 200 snapshots deep. But for those who've played around with snapshots in the past with vSphere, you know that as soon as you create a single snapshot, there's a performance degradation. When you have 5 or 6 of them, or maybe 10, it becomes fairly difficult to use the system. If you delete a snapshot, there's a significant amount of time that it actually takes to copy data from one place to the other place. We've solved all of those problems with vSAN ESA as well, so with the new architecture. And it's basically a full metadata-based system, which also means that whether you create one snapshot or you create 200 snapshots, the performance is going to be the same end to end. And I've actually tested this. I've shown this in various demos already. But the key thing here is not the snapshot capability itself, because the snapshot capability is interesting, but what is more interesting, in my opinion, is then what you can do with the snapshot. As you said, you can replicate it from one location to the other location and use it for DR services. So if one of the sites, for whatever reason, catches fire, or a whole data center goes down as a result of a power outage, you can use live site recovery, or Site Recovery Manager, as was called in the past, to bring back the whole data center in a fully orchestrated manner. But what we've also recently introduced, and this is something which I think is going to be a hot topic in the upcoming months, is a ransomware recovery solution. And we basically enable you through the ransomware recovery solution to use the same snapshotting technology and actually recover from a ransomware scenario, recover the data in batches, or recover the virtual machines in batches, and actually clean them up as part of the process as well, and then move them to a clean environment. So I think those things, those are probably the interesting things that you could do with these snapshots, and it is something that is coming up more frequently. As you noticed when I asked the question, has anyone been unfortunate enough to be in a ransomware recovery scenario in Poland? I think there were like 4 or 5 people out of how many were in the room that raised their hand, and I think that, as I said, there are probably a few of you that don't want to raise your hand because of the
Yeah, exactly.
sensitivity of the scenario. And unfortunately, there's also a few of you that may already be in a scenario where there has been a ransomware
But they don't know yet.
breach, but they don't know yet. So,
Yeah.
it's
I think
it's a cool solution that we're building.
And on top of that, we have the entire operation part, right? That happened over the last years. So beside everything what we talk about, how we create the architecture, in VCF 9, we have as well the operational layer that it's like obligatory, like everybody needs to have it, right? So it's not obligatory, it's like a mandatory for everybody. You have the operations, and then on top of these operations, you can see the how this infrastructure is behaving. I think it's super important in sense when we talk about ransomware, because the one thing is to know from which snapshot you need to restore yourself. It's to see in the monitoring when
Yep.
things starts to happen differently. From the platform of storage platform perspective, the operation change a lot. Do you see there some kind of
Yeah,
redesign?
I think you make a valid point. It's one of the questions I asked as well during the VMUG. You know, how difficult it was to go through the process, just to figure out, indeed, as you said, which snapshot should you be recovering. And from a vSAN, or not just from a vSAN perspective, but from a ransomware recovery perspective, we actually provide some insights in terms of when there was a significant amount of change happening in the environment. But on top of that, we also look at how random the changes were. So you can imagine that if someone copies a database, right, there is not going to be a random IO the randomness of the data that's being stored is different than when someone encrypts a full database, right? Those are two
Mhm.
different. They look different from an IO pattern perspective. So we also scan for those things and will provide you insights into that, which will of course then allow you to pick which snapshot you should be recovering, because that's probably the point in time before the environment was encrypted. Now, the other thing which I also think is interesting, and this is something that we don't tend to discuss in depth that much, but I probably think it's probably one of the most powerful parts of the system, is that we also provide integration with Carbon Black and with CrowdStrike, or we will provide integration with Carbon Black and CrowdStrike in the first release, which will at that point in time enable you to actually scan the virtual machines before you bring them back into production. Because unfortunately, what we've also seen in some cases is that people go back to a certain point in time, and although the data wasn't encrypted, the environment was already breached. So
But
they go back 10 days,
exactly.
and then they find themselves in the same
10 days
situation 2 days after as
later,
a result.
yeah, that's super interesting because this gives you a possibility to build up the clean room. And I think that if anybody was in the ransomware situation, they know that the clean room is the worst, because you never know if it's clean enough. And
Yep.
to restore this data, it's one thing. Okay, you're very happy. Okay, we restore everything, we're back to production. Then, like you said, 3 days later, gone again.
Same thing. Yep.
Yeah, this integration, I think it's very crucial because it's actually creating something what we expecting from the platform. So it's like giving you entire process that you can implement entire process on, let's say, one tool, or the tool fairly well integrated with the tools that you
Yep.
already use in the company. So definitely super interesting. I think that version 9 is a big step forward, that's for sure, with VCF 9, and I'm really looking forward to see what's coming in the next releases of the storage platform, because I think I love vSAN, the name, right? So many merge stuff with vSAN, Captain vSAN, all of this stuff happened for, yeah, exactly. Everything what happened over the last years with vSAN was amazing. But I think we should point here that it's not vSAN anymore, right? It's so integrated with the VCF platform that starts to be platform itself that using vSAN under it, right? Like
Yep.
it's using vSphere under it. Everything starts with this, and probably nothing will work without it. But the new features maybe not gonna be so much interesting on this layer of bits and pieces, but more on this GUI integration API layers that will be provided towards our customers. And I'm very happy that we start to talk about that, because this shows how we can use that software. Duncan, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure, as usual, to have you on podcast, for you to visiting our VMUG, and hopefully we'll see each other, we'll hear each other soon enough to talk about another features and give you some feedback for it. So thank you very much, man.
Awesome. No problem. And
Yeah.
let's keep that feedback coming. I think it's always very valuable for me to not just hear from you, but also from the folks who attend the VMUG or any of the other folks that are listening to this podcast. So if you have any feedback, feel free to drop that feedback in the comments. I'm more than happy to provide it back to the engineering team. Thanks.
Thank you very much.